It's time to start your morning by taking 5. Here's your host, Matt McMaster.
You're listening to Take 5, quick 5-minute take on the biggest things happening in Nebraska sports. I am your host, Matt McMaster, and today we are previewing the Nebraska versus Maryland game tomorrow, 2:30 p.m. kickoff. I believe it is on the Big Ten Network over in Maryland. The first road test, the true road test of Nebraska's football season. They will be taking on Malik Washington and the Maryland Terrapins, who are 4-1 on the year after a complete collapse against the Washington Huskies last week. At one point, they were up 20-3 in the third quarter. They end up losing that game 24-20. A very disappointing result for Maryland in a game where it seemingly they just controlled it all the way up until they just forgot how to play football on both ends of the ball. Huskies, who are a very good team, kind of proved that through the non-con schedule, proved that a little bit when they played Ohio State. I mean, they gave them a fight, but Ohio State might be just that good where it's a compliment to be in a pretty close game with them, which they were competitive, but I don't know how many teams are really going to end up being Ohio State this year. Yet, I digress. Maryland, still a good football team, still 4-1, still capable of beating many teams in the Big Ten, still very capable of beating Nebraska. We're getting into the slate now of the season where Nebraska's favored by 6.5 points in this game. Depending on the result, let's just say they cover the spread, they'll probably end up being favored against Minnesota as well, where you're facing kind of a litany of teams that you are favored to beat, but you very well, barring a bad performance, can end up losing. But if we're looking at this Maryland-Nebraska matchup, it favors Nebraska more than it favors Maryland, but I think that Maryland has the biggest upper hand out of all of the advantages and disadvantages. And what I mean by that is I think Nebraska has the better secondary, Nebraska has the better running back, Nebraska has a better quarterback, Nebraska has better linebackers. Like, Maryland throws the ball 62% of the time. That's seventh most in the country. Nebraska by far is the best secondary. They have a terrible run game. Nebraska, even though they have a weakness on the defensive line, they're not really going to be able to expose it because their run game is even worse than what Nebraska's defensive line is performing at. And so Maryland, if all kind of things stay the same, end up going to be pretty one-dimensional. And Nebraska, is a balanced enough offense where they could throw the ball a ton and they could take advantage of, maybe some missteps on the Maryland defense. But also, even though their pass game is much better than the run game, it's not as if their run game is zeroed. They still could run on this Maryland defense if they choose. But I think the biggest advantage heading into this game is the Maryland defensive line against the Nebraska O-line. I think the Nebraska O-line proved last week that they weren't necessarily having a Michigan problem. They were having a them problem. And last week against Michigan State was the first time we saw the Gatula, Pritchett, Spindler, Latovsky, Justin Evans combo. And you hope that with more reps and more practice and more games under them, that group gets better, which the offensive line under Donovan Raiola historically has gotten better as the season has gone on. It's of my opinion that if Nebraska had a really good offensive line that can combat the really, really good D-line of Maryland, which includes 19 sacks, 64 hurries, some of the best havoc stats in the country, if they had a better O-line to combat that, I think this would be a blowout. But because I think Maryland has such an advantage in that department, this game is going to end up being a little bit closer than maybe we anticipate. I don't think Maryland is going to be able to score the ball a ton against this Nebraska defense. They are just strong in the wrong places in order to take advantages of some of the weaknesses that the Nebraska defense has had. But I do think that the Nebraska offense has to be careful. I think you're going to need a very big game from Dana Holgorsen. He's at a point now where he's coaching around some stuff, right? he's got to recognize the weaknesses of his team, the strengths of Maryland, and he's got to get creative on how to get the ball to the outside. He's got to go through his menu of screen passes that he might be able to use. How do we extend the run game? How do you also take some deep shots against a secondary that isn't great but is pretty good against the pass, and their advanced statistics are some of the better ones in the Big Ten. So it really just boils down to, can Nebraska protect the quarterback? If Nebraska can protect the quarterback, I think that they're going to end up being very successful. And they don't have to do it at a high rate, just at a moderate rate. I think they can come away with a fairly easy victory. But I think the points in where Nebraska can lose this game is getting sacked too much, getting hurried too much, and turnovers. I mean, Maryland is an incredible turnover team. They have 9 interceptions on the season so far through 5 games. It's really, really impressive. So Dylan's got to take care of the ball. He's got to go through he's got to work through some of the mistakes that he made against Michigan State. He's got to improve from his performance last week. But if he performs like he did 2 or 3 weeks prior against Michigan, I think this will be smooth sledding for him. So, Maryland does pros some threats with Stewart and Mathis on the D-line. You also got Trey Reddick, who's a really good linebacker. Those are some last names to look out for on Maryland's defensive side. They also got a guy, Knotts, wide receiver, 6'3", 194 pounds, over 300 yards receiving with 5 touchdowns. That's a guy that we got to watch out for too. But I think all in all, like 6.5 points makes sense if Nebraska can come out and play really well on the offensive line. They come out and they block well, I think Nebraska's going to have some pretty smooth sledding against this Maryland team. If they don't block well, it's kind of a coin toss, and we'll see what happens. My prediction, Nebraska improves in the O-line from last week to this week. I think having another week of these guys kind of together, knowing that they're going to start, having that continuity will help them. And I think that just in general, these last 2 weeks of this O-line, albeit haven't been performing well, still very talented. It could be a nice kick in the butt for them to pick it up. And they know the challenge at hand. I think they know that the game, in a way, the offense, how many points they score, kind of relies on their ability to block up some things. So I think Nebraska wins this game 19-10. I think they only score 1 offensive touchdown, just because I think that they'll get to some points in the red zone where Maryland will lock it up. But I think the special teams unit has been absolutely incredible. I think Kyle Cunanan will have a really big day. And I think Nebraska will be able to move the ball down the field, but I don't know if they're going to be able to cash in points in the red zone. And that'll be something that I'm sure if that were to happen, we'd be concerned with at the end of the week, albeit at the same time, I think that this is kind of what this matchup calls for with Maryland's strengths and Nebraska weaknesses. So 19-10 is my prediction. Nebraska goes 5-1 heading into Minnesota. I'm Matt McMaster, and that's been Take 5.